Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 494, and today's date is October 16th, 2014, and the title of this episode Is the Ebola Crisis the October Surprise? Now, when we take a look at this entire picture, now we understand completely that there is Ebola in West Africa. How far spread it is, we're really not sure. But there are reports coming from some of the locals in West Africa that once they received the vaccine or the experimental drug, it seemed like they were catching Ebola. But let's look at the situation in West Africa. Now, we went through the timeline yesterday, and we understand that Ebola started back in 2013. So it's been almost 1 year since Ebola, this particular outbreak, has been in West Africa. Since that time, we understand that Liberia, Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Congo all have discoveries of oil and natural gas, and we understand that China and Russia are in these countries. Right now, Nigeria and Senegal seem to have Ebola contained, and we do understand that the United States have been trying to get into Nigeria using the playbook of terrorism inside their country, but Nigeria will not let them in there. So we understand that the United States wants to get into these West African countries. So what have they done? Well, we see Ebola completely went wild in West Africa. The United States decided to bring in military assets into this region. The economies were completely destroyed in these countries. The IMF has been loaning these countries money, putting them on the hook to the central bankers. And of course, like any virus, people are going to, travel, take it with them, and it will come and it will get out of control. Now, we understand the virus entered the United States, and ever since this virus has entered the United States, the CDC completely messed up all their protocols, everything they needed to do, miscommunication, nothing went smoothly whatsoever. Now remember, it's been in West Africa now for over a year, and CDC has some personnel down in this area, and you're trying to tell me, and this is what the CDC does, they don't know how to prepare for an outbreak of this kind. It seems outrageous that they don't know how to do this at this point. It does seem like they are taking orders, and they're a little conflicted in what they're supposed to do, and it seems like they're kind of letting it spread throughout the country and letting people get infected. And we can see this by many different things that have been happening where people are not wearing protective gear. I mean, the virus is Ebola. Why in the world wouldn't you think you need protective gear? And you can see they had no excuse because this has been going on in West Africa. So they have experience with it. So it seems like they were kind of backing off the protocols and letting things happen at this point. Now, what I'm getting at is that the corporate media right now has been building up that the stock market's coming down, the economy is not doing that well, and it's all because of Ebola. That's why the economy is slowing, and they're starting to continually use this propaganda over and over at this time. Now, of course, then we have Obama, where he's telling you that it is perfectly safe, you don't have to worry, you can sit next to someone on a bus, there's nothing to worry about. And this reminds me of the border, where he, in the beginning, just stayed quiet about all the illegals coming over, and then eventually said, no, the borders are secure, we're locking them down, and he's doing the same thing with Ebola. Now, again, we know the illegals coming over the border, we know this is part of the Obama administration agenda, and this is starting to look very, very similar. Now, we understand that elections are coming up in November, and Obamacare was a failure. The Middle East is in complete chaos, and it's not looking good for his party. Now, I'm wondering if he's going to try to use this entire thing to make it look like he's some type of hero, where he stopped the spread of Ebola to try to get his party back on top. Now, I'm not Democrat, Republican. I couldn't care less. I'd only care if somebody's in the government working for the people, making the lives here of the people in the United States better. That's it. That's all we need. But it does seem like he might be maneuvering in this way. And we will know for a fact if this is true when we come down to a week or so right before the elections, if they come out with the statement that it has been contained, Ebola is contained, but it has weakened the economy. Now, if this does not happen, we can see that there's another agenda on the horizon here, and this could be where the government is completely inept and they don't know what to do in this situation. The CDC is absolutely worthless and they don't know how to control this whatsoever, and this is a true outbreak of a virus that they can't stop, or it's done purposely to let it spread more so they can cash in on vaccines. And we're going to have to see how this goes at this point, and we'll see as we go through the month of October how this plays out. Let's get into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand the economy here in the United States is completely falling apart. It is imploding. It is happening in Europe. We've been tracking this for quite a while right now, and we can see that it's really taking its toll. And of course, here in the United States, when the Obama administration spokesman was out there saying, do you want to explain why the stock market's going down? How about the economy? They kept diverting all questions right back to Europe and how Europe is not doing well and the United States is just A-OK at this point. But we can see that Europe right now is not doing well, and we see Greece making deals with China, trying to pretty much get their economy back on track because they are in so much debt from the IMF. We see Italy making deals with China and Russia, with the BRIC nations, trying to spur growth. And now we see France saying, something, as we take on more and more debt and we have austerity, this doesn't work. We need growth. And both Italy and France right now are saying that we need to stimulate economic growth. We need to create business. We need something to push the economies out of this. We don't need debt. We don't need austerity. And they are absolutely right, because what we're seeing in Europe is that these countries are completely imploding on themselves because they cannot be sustained, and they're starting to realize this, and they're starting to say, you know what, central bankers, we can't take on any more debt. It's not working. But of course, the central bankers, they want to give more debt because this is their product. The more debt's out there, the more they make. And we can see that jobs are very hard to come by in Europe. Youth unemployment, adult unemployment, skyrocketing. And we see Office Depot in Europe now is going to cut 1,100 jobs. And this is not going to help the situation whatsoever. Here in the United States, they're reporting that the initial jobless claims collapsed to the lowest levels in 2000, so everything is fine right now. And of course, when we look at the numbers, we see unemployment has come down to 5.9%. We're just a hair away from a full recovery, which is 5.5%. And we can see that, of course, as elections are coming up, they're really pushing the recovery and making everyone kind of believe that we are heading into a recovery at this point. But when we look at the real economic indicators, it's not looking good at all. And we see the industrial production beat estimates. The last time industrial production growth was higher than this was May 2010, as the industrial production rose to 1% against expectations of 0.4%. Last month's print was revised lower, so we swung from worst in 2014 to best in 4 years. Manufacturing rose at a modest 0.5%, but it was utilities that stole the show, surging 3.9% due to unseasonably high demand for air conditioning. This is the biggest month-on-month surge in utilities for September in at least 10 years. This is not exactly sustainable, and of course it will not be sustainable. We will see things fall off just like they have in each one of these things that are occurring. Real estate, manufacturing, auto sales, all of it always falls off. GDP, it never can be sustained because it's being pumped up just like a bubble, which it is, a bubble. And what we're seeing right now in real estate, Home builders now are looking at the market, at the real estate market, and their home builder sentiment is sliding now. Remember just last month, their home builder sentiment was way up there. They had great hope. Well, it's starting to come down now. They're looking at the real estate market, and it's not looking good. Sentiment index dropped to 54, missing expectations of 59, led by a collapse in prospective buyers' traffic from 47 to 41. So basically what we're seeing is traffic is starting to dry up. People are not going out to purchase homes. They're not even going to look. And of course, we're heading into the winter months. This is the worst time for real estate. And of course, prices are coming down. And we're not seeing anything happening in real estate that is positive at this time. Even foreclosures are starting to inch up. Default notices in the third quarter increased from a year ago in certain states, including Indiana, up 59%, Oklahoma, up 49%, Massachusetts, up 38%, New Jersey, up 19%, Iowa, up 12%. States with the 5 highest foreclosure rates in the third quarter were among those hit hardest by 2008 the property crash. And we can see it right now. North Carolina, foreclosures now up 85%. Oregon, 85%. New Jersey, up 66%. Oklahoma, 58%. New York, 57%. Connecticut, 51%. Colorado, 48%. Alabama, 24%. Texas, 18%. And Ohio, 17%. So we can see right now, real estate, it's starting to completely fall apart. People are not going to be able to afford these homes. And of course, a lot of people are taking adjustable rate mortgages once again, trying to keep their payments very, very low because of the low interest rates. But as soon as those interest rates inch up a little bit, people are going to be basically in big, big trouble, just like they were in 2008 when they let interest rates just go right back up. Guess what happened? People just left their homes. They couldn't make the payments. They were done. We're going to see the same thing happen once again, but this time it's going to be much, much worse. Now it looks like the Fed is really looking at QE, and they're scratching their heads and they're saying, we might have to keep QE and maybe delay the taper at this time, and we might have to introduce QE4. And of course, the Fed was always out there saying they're looking at the data, and this was what they were going by because they were data dependent, but unemployment is much lower. They're telling us that real estate is rebounding. They're telling us that retail is doing fine. Why all of a sudden, if the stock market has been coming down, are they now saying we might have to untaper and continue with QE? Because are people starting to look at this and saying, oh, they're tapering, the stock market is not doing well, so we need to completely enable QE once again to pump up the stock market? And if this is the case, all these other numbers that they're dependent on are completely worthless because all they're looking at is the stock market. And it seems this is exactly what they're doing. They see the stock market come down, people are looking at it, and then they're starting to look around the country going, is the economy really doing that well, or is it starting to fall apart? And they're starting to realize that people are starting to notice. And what they need to do is pump this back up. Now, we have to understand that they've been tapering. Now, we know this is a complete illusion. We know they've been just maneuvering and channeling their money in different places. That's been going out to Belgium, to Euroclear, to other countries, and it's been going to many other places. And we have to look at this, that the big commercial banks right now are battening down the hatches. They're preparing for bad times. Banks are stockpiling these days, and they're stockpiling U.S. government bonds, and they're not doing this casually. They're doing this by the truckload now. And when we look at this, just the last month alone, American banks increased their holdings of U.S. Treasuries by $54 billion to a record $1.99 trillion. I wonder who the Fed had purchased the Treasury bonds. Very interesting. Citigroup, for example, held about $103.8 billion worth of bonds at the end of June, up 19% from the end of last year. This is like preparing for an earthquake by running out and buying whole new sets of porcelain dishes and glass vases. With government bonds, you are guaranteed to lose both in the short term and long term. Bonds keep you consistently behind inflation, so the value of your savings is slowly chipped away. Why do they keep buying bonds that they know the government will never be good for? Even though people know in their guts that the government has no earthly possibility to ever repay its debt, on paper it's a no-risk investment. Bank of International Settlements Basel Capital Adequacy Rules, government debt rated at least AA continues to carry a zero-risk weighting, meaning that banks do not need to set aside a capital against it. With a combined position of nearly $2 trillion in U.S. government debt against which they hold little or no capital buffer, U.S. banks are now extremely vulnerable to a bond market sell-off. So we can see right now these banks are basically insolvent. And what they're doing is they're purchasing treasury bonds, taking up the slack from the Fed, and when this entire thing comes crumbling down, no one will be able to get their savings, no one will be able to get their investments, and this is why they created the bail-in documents. Now you see it all coming together. Banks are insolvent, they need the bail-in documents, they need to capture your money inside of the banks, they can't let it out, and they need this to recapitalize themselves, and this is exactly what we're seeing happening. Now, we understand Ebola right now is pretty much in the United States, in Europe, in West Africa. I mean, right now we have 3 confirmed cases in the United States. And what's very interesting about all of this, and I said this in the beginning of the report, medical workers in Dallas wore no special protective gear for 2 days while caring for Thomas Duncan, which makes no sense because the CDC knows that with Ebola you need protective gear because they've been dealing with it in West Africa. So basically this is CDC's only kind of job to deal with diseases, and you're trying to tell me they don't know to tell medical staff to wear protective gear? It makes no sense. Now here's an interesting statement from Dr. Ton Frieden, director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And he said this during a telephone press briefing Wednesday, that you cannot get Ebola by sitting next to someone on a bus. Now, this sounds like President Obama. But that infected or exposed persons should not ride public transportation because they could transmit the disease to someone else. Does this make any sense whatsoever? So, if you don't have Ebola, you can ride the bus and you don't have to worry about getting it from someone who has Ebola. But if you have Ebola, you could transmit it to that person who's sitting on the bus. This makes absolutely no sense, and it seems like they're getting misinformation from the White House. This is what they want them to say. It conflicts with what is really going on, and he gets his information all bungled up, and he doesn't know which direction to go. And this really seems like this is what's happening because it's starting to look like that this is part of a certain agenda at this time. Now, what's very interesting is the CDC and the White House saying that Ebola is not airborne whatsoever. The Center for Disease Control and World Health Organization officials continue to insist Ebola cannot be transmitted by air from one person to another, but there's an Army manual that clearly warns that virus could be an airborne threat in certain circumstances. The handbook published by the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, U.S.AMRID, titled U.S.AMRID's Medical Management of Biological Casualties Handbook. This is the most recent edition, and it was published in 2011 with more than 100,000 copies distributed to military and civilian healthcare providers around the world. On page 117 of the handbook, in a chapter discussing viral hemorrhagic fever, a category of viruses that includes Ebola, They say that in several instances, secondary infections among contacts and medical personnel without direct bodily fluid exposure have been documented. These instances have prompted concern of rare phenomenon of aerosol transmission of infection. And what they recommend in certain areas that they know that have Ebola is that patients that do have this, the hemorrhagic fever which is Ebola, and if they have a cough, they had diarrhea, and they have all the symptoms, they should be in a negative pressure isolation room with 6 to 12 air exchanges, adequate to pump air out of the hospital room on a consistent basis through biofilters. We have to consider the possibility that this is airborne, just like this handbook says, and it's very odd, again, that the CDC, the World Health Organization, all the medical staff, they've been dealing with this for over a year in West Africa, and they're taking none of these precautions whatsoever. Now, despite the outbreak of Ebola, it is still possible to get a visa from the 3 West African countries at the heart of the outbreak, and key congressman is demanding to know why. Well, CDC, the Obama administration is saying that if we stop the traffic coming in from West Africa, it would make Ebola worse here in the United States, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But of course, this is what they're using right now, and of course, they don't want to stop the air traffic because they don't want it to hurt the airlines. They want to make everything look like everything is fine, and it makes no sense of why they're still letting West African people into the country if this is a outbreak like they say it is. Now, the EU health ministers agreed Thursday to launch an immediate review of screening of passengers departing Ebola-hit countries in West Africa. Now, the EU's doing it. Why isn't the United States doing it? Makes no sense. The European Commission will immediately undertake an audit of exit screening systems in place in the infected countries to check their effectiveness and reinforce them as necessary. Now, what we're seeing from all of this is that the Obama administration is saying, don't worry, it's under control. The CDC basically continually messes up and bungles the whole situation and can't make anything work. And it seems like they're getting information from the White House, and it's contradicting with what they know to do. And this is what it looks like. But CNN, and I said this in the beginning of the report, placed the blame for the Dow plunging about 460 points on Ebola. There was no mention of the 21-point plunge in Empire State Manufacturing Index, nor was there any mention of weak consumer spending. There was no mention of Walmart or other financial institutions lowering GDP forecasts. There was nothing about real estate, where mortgage applications are plunging. The leading indicator, the gauge to show people buying homes, none of that was mentioned. It was only Ebola, and they're saying the slowdown for everything that we're seeing, it's because of Ebola. So they're already out there starting to use this, and this is what we're seeing at this point. Now, we understand there's a confirmed nurse who took a plane, and it seems like the Center for Disease Control said that they were allowing this nurse to fly. She said she had a temperature, and they said no. It's the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention said that that she could fly. There was no problem. We understand that you have a 99.5 degree fever, but because the fever wasn't 100.4, there was no risk of anything. So it didn't reach the stage that it was at, and they said, go ahead, go fly. But she was just with an Ebola patient. Didn't it come into their minds to think like, well, wait a minute, you were just with the Ebola patient, you have a temperature, maybe you shouldn't fly. Now, what CDC did was lower their temperature standards down to 99.5 instead of 100.4. Now, Obama's out there, and he's going to tackle this problem right now. He's creating a CDC SWAT team. Obama promised Wednesday that his administration plans to respond in a much more aggressive way to Ebola outbreaks, including have the Center of Disease Control and Prevention send in a SWAT team when new cases are diagnosed. Now, he said this with the illegals coming over, that he's going to get to the bottom of this. He's going to go and, discuss the whole situation, and he pretty much did nothing. And we see the same thing happening here. He's giving a lot of lip service right now. And we're going to have to see how this all plays out, because, of course, they're going to create a SWAT team to fight Ebola. Well, maybe we should inform the medical staff and inform CDC and inform the people of the United States of precautions to take. Like maybe after we come in contact in public, we should, douse our hands under ultraviolet light, or maybe we should use bleach to kill the virus. All these different things. But instead, he'll create his SWAT team. Now, there was one interesting picture, and it boggles your mind. Out in Phoenix, Phoenix Air has released a statement explaining why there was a man with a clipboard around 5 people in hazmat suits bringing a patient onto a plane. Now, they had 5 people in hazmat suits with respirators bringing an Ebola patient onto the plane, and then there was a man with a clipboard just in his pants and shirt, which makes no sense whatsoever. And again, here's another situation that makes no sense. And of course, the excuse they said was that these people couldn't see out of their hazmat suits, so this person had to direct them onto the plane. So he doesn't mind getting infected with Ebola. So something is not right here. Something doesn't make sense. Now, at this time, throughout 2013 and going into December of 2014, it seemed like FEMA has been preparing for the appearance of a pandemic of deadly disease in the near future. And we see right now that they're having a series of exercises to deal with different types of pandemic. The federal executive boards in New York City and Northern New Jersey, in partnership with FEMA Region 2, the Department of Health and Human Services Region 2, New York City Department of Health, and Mental Hygiene, Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, and the Clearinghouse Association are sponsoring a 2-year series of pandemic influenza continuity exercises: Tabletop Exercise 2013, Full-Scale Exercise 2014, to increase readiness for a pandemic event amongst federal executive departments and agencies. The exercise had been underway since 2013 and is scheduled to go through December 4th of 2014, and it is very interesting that they are doing this at this point. Okay, now we understand in Hong Kong there are protesters there who are funded by the United States, and we understand that China is getting ready to go live with the BRIC nations on 2015, and of course the United States do not want this to happen, and the central bankers are trying to completely stop this. And we can see right now that the protesters seem to go in different waves here of more people show up than people leave, and it's really not getting off the ground at all. But the authorities in Hong Kong said on Thursday they are ready to start talks with student protesters next week. The past few days, the government had been negotiating through middlemen with Hong Kong Federation of Students, and now they're ready to talk to them and try to iron out what has been going on. Now, it's very interesting in regards to Russia. Obama was out there and is saying that, Russia has no manufacturing, the sanctions are going to hurt them, their economy is failing. And what we're really seeing is that Obama is pretty much not telling everyone exactly what's going on. Basically, whatever he's saying, it's the opposite. Russia's industry expands rapidly in September, hammers expectations, fastest growth since 2012, manufacturing up 3.6%, food production shows double-digit growth. This contradicts many reports in U.S. media which take unquestionably the Obama administration assertions that the Russian economy is doing poorly as a result of Obama's sanctions against Russia. China and Russia signed natural gas deal. I mean, look at all the things they've done here. Russia seals deal with China on currency swaps. BRICS to create new development bank in Brazil. Obama says Russia doesn't make anything. August 23rd, World Bank study. Drivers of firm-level productivity in Russia's manufacturing sector. Russia experienced a well-documented productivity surge over the period of 1999 to 2005 following the 1998 crisis. This contributed to a dynamic growth and poverty reduction. Estimated annual total factor productivity growth of 5.8% was the driving force behind the observed average annual real GDP growth of 6.5% over this period. Productivity in manufacturing itself, an important engine of Russia's growth, grew at a healthy rate of over 4% in this period. Russian economy has vastly outperformed the U.S. economy since Putin entered office, and Russia's has been the only major economy whose growth has rivaled China's. Regarding Obama's immigrants aren't rushing to Moscow in search of opportunity, Forbes notes that Russia is in fact the world's second most popular destination for immigrants after the United States. Russian manufacturing showed a second consecutive month of growth in August, propped up by new orders, suggesting that the Western sanctions haven't yet impacted this sector. And guess what? These sanctions are doing absolutely nothing inside of Russia. They are just maneuvering where they're getting their agricultural products. They're removing themselves from the dollar. They're doing everything internal. So whatever the United States thinks they're doing and whatever propaganda they're putting out there, it is not having any effect whatsoever. And of course, the corporate media, the Obama administration, they want the American people to believe that, yes, we are damaging Russia right now. And they're saying, oh, the ruble is falling against the dollar. But if they're removing themselves from the dollar, do they really care at this point? Because if they're using the ruble with swapping with the yuan or renminbi, they're using the ruble with Iran not going through the dollar. Do they really care at this point about the dollar if the dollar is collapsing? Think about that for a sec. Now, Putin is out there and he says if Ukraine decides to siphon off the gas, they're going to limit deliveries for Europe. But Europe will get all their gas that they need. But if they try to do this, they will slow down the delivery to stop Ukraine from getting the gas reserves from Europe. Now, Russia may introduce special economic regime with Ukraine, and Russia has submitted a proposal to the government on introducing a special economic regime with Ukraine to revise the current contracts with Kiev and ban further deals. The goal is very simple: forcing Ukraine to peace. And we can see that Putin is meeting with Poroshenko, and we can see two things are happening in Ukraine. I said this yesterday, that we have the central bankers on one side and Poroshenko dealing with Putin because he's looking at what his country is looking at right now, and that is a complete collapse and an overthrow of his rule. And he's thinking to himself, he better do something, and it looks like peace is in the direction that he wants to head at this time. But again, the central bankers are not going to like this whatsoever. Now, Russia is out there and they're saying they are completely ready to manufacture all of their military products in-house if needed. They don't want to do this, but if they have to, they will do this. Russia has started working on an import substitution program in order to meet all of the defense industry's goals and not to put the army and the industry in an uncertain situation. They realize what is coming. China understands, Russia understands, the BRIC nations understand that eventually the central bankers are going to continually push war until they get something started. And you can see right now they're trying to keep everything internal instead of going outside to get whatever they need. Now, it looks like two Egyptian officials claim the country's warplanes had begun bombing positions in Benghazi, the second largest city in neighboring Libya, on Wednesday in an attempt to stop the tribes from taking back Libya. And we can see right now that they're trying everything they possibly can to stop what is happening. It is happening in Libya, it is happening in Iraq, it is happening in Yemen, and they're trying to stop, and Lebanon also, and they're trying to stop this because, again, the puppet regimes are being pushed out. The people are taking back their country. Now, the Gulf states plan to launch a joint naval force, a top Kuwaiti defense official said on Wednesday, in a bid to protect waters shared with neighboring Iran. The new force is expected to be formed in the coming months. The Gulf Cooperation Council states Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates formed the Peninsula Shield Force. The size of the force will depend on the level of external threats for Gulf marine security. So again, they are getting prepared for what is coming, and they realize something is coming because they've been notified ahead of time that something big is about to happen here. The USS Carl Vinson is set to take over airstrikes in Syria. The Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group is going to replace the George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier, and they're going to pretty much substitute it out right now to continually strike into Syria and Iraq. Now, it looks like the U.S. airstrikes are not really doing much inside Syria and Iraq, and it seems like the Islamic State is advancing and maneuvering and going to all the new areas that the United States wants the Islamic State to go to, and then they'll find new places to bomb. And this is exactly what is happening, because we have to understand the Islamic State is created by the United States, Israel, UK, and other Arab nations. They are a proxy army, and they're being maneuvered and used to pretty much go after Assad. And, of course, they're trying to play this down that, no, we're not going after Assad. We're going after terrorism. If that is true, then why didn't they include Syria? Why didn't they include Iran? Why didn't they include Russia? They left them completely out, especially when Iran and Syria were out there saying, we will help you. But they didn't want their help. And that is proof right there that later on they will be going after Syria, then Iran. Now, Russia is playing down what John Kerry said yesterday about sharing intelligence about the Islamic State. What they're saying is that they talked about it, but Moscow refuses to be involved in any coalitions that breach international law. They need to go to the UN and form a United Nations coalition to go into Syria and to stop terrorism. And right now, Moscow and the United States are not joining forces whatsoever to go after the Islamic State. And we can see that John Kerry was out there. He made a statement that they're going to share intelligence, and Russia is saying absolutely not. We will only do this if the United Nations puts together the coalition, not a private coalition put together by the United States. Now, it looks like Erdogan is ready to take initiative in the fight against the Islamic State and Assad. Erdogan would also enable NATO to use Turkish bases for ground operations against the Islamic State and Assad. They said the Turkish military would also participate in incursions. So it looks like they're getting prepared to do something, and we're going to have to watch this part very, very carefully. Now, the FBI is issuing an alert saying that the Chinese are going to hack private companies in the United States. The United States has issued a fresh warning to businesses about an alleged hacking plot by the Chinese government to steal high-value data from the U.S. companies and government agencies and to infiltrate the financial institutions. In an alert Wednesday, the Federal Bureau of Investigation described tools and techniques used by a group of highly skilled Chinese hackers and asked federal authorities if they believe they were targets of cyber attacks. The alert described the Chinese group as exceedingly stealthy and agile. And we can see right now they are pushing this propaganda to make everyone believe that China, Russia, they are going to be involved in bringing this entire system down. We can see we're on that track of collapse. Right now they're using Ebola to explain the slowdown and why the stock market is coming down and why the economy is not doing well. And later on, when we start in a full collapse mode, all of a sudden it will be blamed on Russia. It will be blamed on China. Since they hit the financial institutions with cyber attacks, planting malware inside of the stock exchange, the BATS, the NASDAQ. And we can see they're pushing this propaganda. They want everyone to believe this, but we know better. We understand. We've been following. The economy has been coming down all along. The only thing that has been up is the stock market, because that's the only thing they can control. The rest of the country, with economy, with retail, with people having jobs, they cannot control whatsoever. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.